we talked about this, and you wanted to ask me about my political stance and how much I'm involved in it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, man, I'm not too involved with it anymore. I mean, I don't really keep up with it because my thing is, we can get into this. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever changes, and it might sound ignorant, and a lot of people might say, you need to be more in tune with what's going on in your surroundings. But I mean, like I said,
yeah, we can get into it. I mean, I'm pretty cynical too, so I sympathize. I absolutely sympathize with your position,
especially because for me, Iranian, what's going on in Iran and the regime and. My people going through it right now. My auntie and grandma are actually in Iran right now,
okay.
and Massa.
Just make sure my phone is off.
Yeah, no problem. And the 1 year anniversary of Massa Amini death was yesterday. My mom was in. Well, actually, I don't know if she went to the protest, but there was a whole protest in downtown again. And I didn't go. I haven't gone to one of them. I feel like I should have as an Iranian, but yeah, man, I don't. With politics, whenever someone wants to bring it up and talk about it, I get a little nervous because I'm not too educated about it, and I don't want to sound like an idiot.
Oh no, we don't. I'm not.
Right?
I'm not here to do that either.
But I just know nothing changes. So
yeah, and we'll get into it. I'm just curious about your level of engagement and how you see things. It's interesting you bring up your ancestry on that. I think South Asians are very cynical about politics because Indian and Pakistani politics are very corrupt, right? So we're just like, politics is corrupt. Corrupt people go into politics. Everything is corrupt, which I think is a simplistic read. I think there's absolutely corruption, but sometimes it's just a little more complicated than that. We do have, and speaking to your point about change, it's a battleship. The big bureaucracy of government is a battleship, and so you can't just pull a UE. It has to turn in degrees to get change done. As much as even myself will advocate for we need let's just fucking do this. Let's do this. In practice, it's never that easy.
It's never that. Yeah, has to go through a bunch of steps and go back a few steps and then go forward again.
Which can be really frustrating when you are in legitimate crises. Right? I mean, I would argue that they still haven't done anything on housing, but housing, climate change, whatever crisis we have, it's just there's a need and a want for urgency, but oftentimes it's just very difficult to move things along.
Do you think it's a pretty ignorant way of thinking about things? But I just think, man, every politician, in my opinion, is crooked, and the reason why, I respect Donald Trump enough is because he's blatantly honest about he's
blatantly corrupt,
right? He's blatantly and out in.
I can't say I respect it, but sure, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying in terms of I'd rather you be admit that you're an asshole than pretend you're a nice guy and actually be an asshole. I get that. I don't know.
I mean, I don't even know with Donald Trump, it just, whenever someone gets into office, like Joe Biden at the start was oh, this is the savior, this is what we want. After a year or two, people start making new excuses about him. Well, he's not doing this, he's not doing that. At least with Trump, he was creating more jobs for people. I'm not educated on the U.S. politics. I'm not too educated on Canadian politics, let alone fucking the States.
Yeah.
But all I know is that, people always bitch about Trudeau. He had, I don't know, that he was letting in, I don't know, was that a thing? He was letting in homeless people from Alberta, and
it wouldn't have been Trudeau that would be coordinating that. No, I mean, that happens where jurisdictions ship their homeless population to other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
That's sadly a thing that happens. I don't know the full story. I feel like we did that during the Olympics in 2010. We shipped a lot of people somewhere else.
Right.
So it happens. But that's actually why homelessness needs to be a federal issue, right? Not a provincial issue or not even a municipal issue. They're involved, but the problem is it's a free country. You can move wherever you want. There's whether you have a home or don't, you have the right to move within the borders of Canada. So when people are like, these homeless people aren't even from here, and it's like, what does that fucking mean? Like,
Right, they have the right to move around.
Yeah.
But what I heard was they were making the train tickets from wherever to BC literally like $5. So it was
Well,
almost like they were like they were
in
encouraged.
fairness, in fairness, again, I don't know what you're referring to. I've heard absolutely stories that this happens, but BC would be desirable for, like Vancouver particularly, because of our temperate weather, would be desirable for people who don't have proper shelter. Like, I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But again, I think that just for me, like when people are like, oh, these homeless people aren't even from here, I'm like, so what? Like, okay, so like now what? What do you want to do?
Right. I mean, what does that even mean? Like,
Yeah.
okay, like, what do you?
Yeah.
Are they not allowed to? Like, if they can travel here, if they can get here,
Yeah.
we can't.
You can't
stop them.
You can't
from not.
force anyone. You can incentivize them. You can give them money to go somewhere else, sure. But like, what does that do? It's just a stupid game of like sending people back and forth.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't know. We can get into it and see.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like I want to talk about Vancouver and like,
Yeah.
you know, you're obviously very into the scene and you have a good understanding of the climate of Vancouver. And I guess I have a lot of opinions on Vancouver. We've talked about this on.
Do you live here in Poco?
I live in North Van.
Oh, so do I. Where in North Van do you live?
Oh, dude, I live right beside. Well, I used to live right beside Grouse,
Okay.
like Edgemont Village area near Handsworth. That's where I went to high school.
Okay, cool. I went to Windsor.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, we weren't. I mean, Handsworth and Windsor people didn't really hang out. We were
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
just like
We're
on the
different
other
sides of North Van.
different sides.
Yeah. We were like closer to the Sea Cove kids.
Exactly. But now I live near Main Street, like near
Okay. Canadian Tire. And,
Canadian Tire, Second Narrows.
Yeah. I live in Upper Lonsdale now. I grew up on Mount Seymour Parkway, and then even when I moved out of the house, was like near Parkgate, and then as of last year, moved to Upper Lonsdale.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can talk about this, man, but I've talked about this with my buddies that we grew up in North Van together. What's with the pretentiousness in North Van? What is it? I don't know. It's just
We can
like
talk about it. Yeah,
it's like a
I'm fine.
cycle. It's like a generational thing. You know, I see it with people that I graduated with 10 years
Let's
ago.
lead with that. Oh, well, I don't know if you want to lead with that, but I'm happy to.
I absolutely want to.
Let's talk about it. That's fine. Yeah, let's save that. But I have some thoughts. North Van is weird. It's really. I'll bring this up when you ask it, but like, there's such a big, and I'm part of them, but there's such a big contingent of us that still live in North Van. And it's not a cheap place to live by any means, but like so many of us from our grad class still live in North Van, which I find really fascinating. But we can get into if it's pretentious or not.
I definitely think it is. I mean, there is a stigma around North Van where, I mean, it's predominantly white, which I agree, but it's becoming more multicultural throughout the years.
But like it always had a pretty good Persian population. Like I feel like even when I was a kid growing up, there were a lot of Persians.
There were, yeah. I mean, more so West Van.
Yeah,
I would
but
say.
also Lonsdale. And even on our side, like there was a fair amount, but yeah, you're right. Like West Van, I would argue Lonsdale too. I mean, Lonsdale still has a bunch of like Persian shops, right?
Yeah. It's basically like Lonsdale has a lot of Persians. Yeah, there's a bunch of Persian restaurants and all that.
How many people are actually buying jewelry off Lonsdale? Do they have all those gold places?
Do they?
I don't know. There's all those shops
Lonsdale?
there, like Central Lonsdale. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And I'm like, do people actually go here to buy jewelry? I'm not like, aside from watches, I don't buy jewelry, but I'm always curious about that. If people come to that there's a couple of little blocks there that are like, they're also like the cash for gold places. So if you do,
Yes, I do know those ones.
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen those. Yeah.
and they also do money exchange, which you add all those things together, and I'm like,
Yeah.
there's something.
I've seen a few of those
going
money exchange places. Yeah, the currency places. Yeah. Now, I think people in North Van know that it's expensive living there, and the fact that they're living there is something that they can like harpoon on and say, "Oh, well, I live in North Van. It's expensive. I'm cool.
Yeah. And maybe the reason why a lot of people, including myself, stay in North Van is because if you bought into North Van, you would just accumulate so much generational wealth that it's easy to help your kids then buy their first place, right? And with their down payment because you take a line of credit on your home or whatever. So maybe that's why. I don't know. It is an interesting neighborhood, and you're right. Like there's an air of, I'm not going to defend North Van by any means, but there's there's an air of arrogance. Sure.
I'm curious to know actually because, I never thought I experienced racism growing up in North Van, being Persian. I never blatantly felt like I went through it at any point. Like I can never pinpoint a moment in my life being like, damn, that was a really racist time. They were being really racist towards me. But speaking to my therapist, because I have a therapist and I talk to him, and after explaining a few things to him about my childhood and my experiences in elementary and high school, he was able to tell me that those things that I was going through were microaggressions, racial microaggressions.
Sure. Yeah.
Thinking back on it now, I'm just like, damn it, man. Yeah, fuck. That was racial shit that I was going through. I didn't realize it during the moment because the people being racist they didn't even know they were being racist. They weren't very conscious of the microaggressions they were putting out onto me, projecting onto me.
Yeah.
Did you feel racism, being Middle Eastern, North Van?
Yeah, no, like it's complicated. And again, I think when you say yes or no to that question, people get very reductive and assume one thing or another. When I started grade 11, 9/11 happened, right? So that like really changed a lot of the dynamics of how I think brown people were viewed, particularly. And not that we were like super practicing Muslims. My mom kind of was, but like she was pretty liberal. She never wore the hijab or anything. And even if she did, it was whatever. But I think that changed the dynamic. But I do wonder how much of it, the divisions in North Van were really based around class and, the neighborhood you lived in, right? Like, but in terms of microaggressions, yeah, absolutely. I think that for sure existed.
Right.
I think it comes out in weird ways, like how teachers would treat you necessarily. Like, let's say there was you got into a little scrap with someone or whatever. Would you as a Persian guy or brown guy be treated differently than the white guy?
The white guy.
Right. And I think that there were absolutely, not that I ever got into like physical fights with people, but like I remember that there seemed to be like an inequity of how discipline was handed out.
Yeah, maybe. So I don't really remember. Yeah, I don't really remember the discipline part of it. Maybe that's something I wouldn't even remember. I remember just like within social groups, man, like amongst my peers, I just remember coming home some days from school and thinking that was weird. Like I didn't feel like I was included for most parts of my high school life. And a lot of the time I would come home thinking, what's up with that? What did I do wrong today? Like, why was I not accepted in that environment, in that situation? What did I say something wrong? Did I carry myself a certain way?
So did your parents immigrate here?
Yes, my mom did.
Okay, and your dad?
My dad I never met.
Okay,
he stayed in Iran, and then my auntie and my uncle and my grandma all moved from Iran.
So this is good stuff that we should be talking about on the podcast. But I mean, I'll just say this. I think as kind of first gen immigrants when you're a kid, we immigrated here when I was 4, so really North Van was all I knew.
Mm-hmm.
But like we end up straddling two worlds, right? And so we're like, you develop this hyper awareness of like your ancestral cultural world and then like the Western world that you're in. And I think you almost like people call it code switching. And I think it's usually with regard to like the African American or Black community, but I think we had our own version of like code switching and like changing our behaviors and like the way we would talk with different groups. And I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think whenever you're kind of navigating these two worlds and you're keeping them even subconsciously in your head like that, you're going to say something weird. You're going to be also hypercritical of maybe you did say something weird or you didn't, but you're in your own head about it.
Were you aware of that as a young kid growing up in North Van? Like you would go to school and feel like, oh, these white kids and how they talk and how they act.
I think, yeah. I on some level, like, I don't think I was writing a manifesto or a manual about it, but like, I think you internalize it, you're subconscious about it. And I think, I'm trying to think about how was I aware, but you are aware that like and it's probably true, I'm assuming, but like your household was probably different than the white friends that you had in terms of their household.
Yeah.
Right. And like, the way that, I mean, Russell Peters had this old joke about like how brown kids would talk to their parents, but then like you'd go to their white person's house, kids like yelling at their mom.
Mom, fuck you, Mom.
Yeah.
I want to play my Xbox.
Yeah. And then he's like, I think that was like his first big special. And it came out when I was in high school, but the joke was like, he went to his dad and he's like, you know what, Dad? Fuck you. Yeah. And his dad's like, somebody gonna get her.
Yeah, somebody got it.
And so it's like, yeah, like I think we had a different social intelligence that you just had to develop to kind of navigate both worlds simultaneously.
Right. I think my mom she encouraged me to adopt the Western.
Yeah, so did my parents. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like she never really put me into that box. Like, these white kids are bad kids, like don't be like that. Like she actually wanted me to.
And that's why we're here, right? And that's why our parents immigrated here for sure. But ultimately I think they still had internal expectations of like how the house runs,
Of course.
And like your role as the child in the house, and particularly the son or whatever.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. But she was, I guess, contrary to a lot of Persian families that immigrate, my mom was fairly open-minded to.
Do you have siblings?
Just me.
Oh yeah, me too.
Just me. Oh yeah?
Center of the universe,
right
man.
On. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different vibe, man, being on your own, has anyone told you that they can sense that you're an only child? Because I've been told that before.
I've been told both. I've been told that they can sense it, and I've also been told that they are surprised. I definitely like. It's funny because as I've gotten older, I've become more aware of that stuff. But I have a couple of friends who are only children, and when I see them exhibit those type of stereotypes, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I see it.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the only child and the middle child that's always like pretty in your face. Like,
is that right?
Yeah. Well, the middle child's notorious for being like the weird one or kind of off, and if someone
I feel like when you're siblings, and again, I'm only saying it from the outside, but like I've heard older children complain and be like, I took the brunt of it. And like my younger siblings, I like paved the way. They had an easy time. I had a tough. And then I've heard the like youngest siblings of big families being like, I was the forgotten kid. Like no one gave a shit about me. Like the first time I whatever, accomplished something like, I don't know, not read, but like first time I won a medal, no one cared. Yeah. They've seen it.
They've seen it 5
times.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So I feel like we all just come up with our own gripes and our own explanations for like why our childhood was not optimal.
Right. Matt, I gotta ask you about this, and I want to get into this. This is a theme we've talked about on several episodes, where as a society, we're in this gray area where we don't really know who we are, and we don't really know what to believe in and what direction to go towards. So there's a bunch of like things happening where we stick onto this, stick onto that, this movement, that movement, this social movement, this advocacy for this. And what do you sense Vancouver's identity is? after living here, talking to so many guests, being in that stream, like a lot of people, I've heard this from a lot of people that don't live in Vancouver. They always say Vancouver doesn't really have an identity. There's no culture to Vancouver. At least Montreal has a bit of a culture. At least Toronto's developed a bit of a culture through guys like Drake, The Weeknd, Justin Bieber. We as a city, as a culture, we just try to piggyback on different places like LA, Toronto, mostly Toronto.
Yeah.
Where's your stance on that? What do you think?
Should I save this for the podcast? I feel like we've been.
Oh, we're recording. Oh,
we've
God,
been recording this
whole
time.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh
we're
man,
recording.
you're catching me off the off here,
baby. We're going
no
for
intro, nothing. No hello.
Oh, no intro. No intro.
How are you
man.
doing?
I don't like doing that
today.
We're not too professional like that.
We're just getting into it. Okay. Yeah, Vancouver's identity. Great question. Wait, so did we record that North Van stuff? Was that on record? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Sorry. No, all good.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Vancouver's identity. I think it has to be acknowledged that Vancouver is, in the large scheme of things, and certainly in the history of the world, is a young city, right? Like, obviously there were ancestral people that lived here, but in terms of the Vancouver that we know as like an urban center, it's young, even compared to Montreal, certainly compared to European cities, certainly compared to, other cities around the world. Like, we're a very young city. And so I almost feel like Vancouver has a bit of a chip on its shoulder, and trying to prove itself as a global city. Like, we keep saying that, like, we're a world-class city. We almost say it, I think, to convince ourselves sometimes. And let's be honest, Vancouver is an amazing place. Like, I was on the water yesterday and we're whale watching. We saw humpbacks and like, it was just a beautiful day, and it's like mid-September, it's paradise. And so there's amazing things about the natural landscape of this city that I think often defines us, especially when you think about how we dress, the Gore-Tex and all that stuff. The fact that we are a very active city, everyone's into yoga or cycling or whatever. Like, people are very much into fitness or skiing and snowboarding. Like, that, I think, somewhat defines us, like being outside and active and enjoying the landscape. In terms of the other stuff, like culture, I think we're figuring that out. Because again, we're a very young city, and the demographics, certainly racially and culturally, continue to evolve, right? And where perhaps there were pockets of like racialized groups, there, as time goes on, there's much more mingling, and so on one hand, we want to pay tribute to the past, Chinatown being a great example and absolutely what should be a gem of the city. And at the same time, we're trying to move beyond that to like a very multicultural, unified city. And I think in terms of identity, we probably share more with like a Seattle or a San Francisco than we would with certainly a Montreal.
And has it improved since 15 years ago,
what
man?
does improvement mean?
I don't know. I don't know.
Because for the business world, I'm sure that they would say it's improved. And certainly, that's helped a lot of people. If you're middle class, upper middle class, like, sure. If you got into real estate, decades ago, yeah. Oh, yeah. It totally improved. But when it comes to things like, homelessness, cost of rent, cost of living here, no, it's gotten way worse. Right. And so it's just like, you have to define the parameters of what improvement is.
More so socially.
Socially, but again, like socially, like, what do you mean specifically?
Open-mindedness, less racism.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I know that racism is still an issue. We have certainly systemic racism that presents itself in things like policing. We have overt racism in terms of like anti-Asian attacks, which absolutely happen. But at the same time, on the whole, we are quite progressive, right? Like, you look at like the Pride Festival, which is very inclusive event and almost a corporate event, right? Like everyone wants to be a part of that or attach their name to it. And so there is like a certain, not to use a pun or double entendre, but like there's certain pride that people take in being progressive here or socially progressive, which is great. But in terms of like taking care of the most vulnerable, I don't know if we're necessarily doing that.
Right. And so what you just said there is what I think about when I think about Vancouver is I think it's just phony progressiveness. I don't think people are progressive for the actual matter of the reason why they're advocating for whatever movement.
So do you think it's performative?
I think so. I really think it's, and that's where
There's an element of that. Yeah.
I think that's what I mean by we're grabbing on to different things like BLM. Like people are like, oh, okay. Like people here are like, okay, like BLM, that's the thing. Let's advocate for that. Let's go gangbusters on that. Right? But they don't really know deep down why they want to do it or whether it's really even going to work. Like my point is like people's critical thinking and what they really care about is non-existent here. It's just we follow up, we jump on any trend that other places in the world are.
Yeah, I've heard that criticism too, and that's fair. And we definitely take a lot of our cultural cues from the United States. And I would, again, argue a lot of our cultural cues from West Coast United States as well. I would agree with you that there's absolutely an element of sort of progressivism, a performative element of that. And BLM is an interesting example because, you know, I wonder how many people, and I'm not judging anyone that is, you know, going out there and putting on the black square and anything like that. But like, how many of those people in Vancouver know about Hogan's Alley, right? Which was a black community in, I wish I knew the decade offhand, but in Vancouver's past, it was a black community which was raised to create the viaducts that we have, right? And so they completely displaced this community, and it's like a part of our history. And now you have like the Hogan's Alley Society, which is looking at ways to reclaim some of that land and perhaps make, either socialized housing or just a better community space. And so we do have like black history in this city. And so the people that put up the black square on Instagram, like, are they aware of it? Or did they seek out that information? Because it's not necessarily just a history of the United States. It is a history that exists here as well. Certainly, I think when you think about things like policing, right, and the disproportion, how I would argue Indigenous and black folks are treated throughout this country is very different than how white folks are treated by police. So these things exist. And I think being conscious of that or being quote unquote woke about that is a good thing. But you're right. I think it is just human. It's like bumper sticker politics, right? Where you just throw on the label just to let everyone know that like you're cool, as opposed to like trying to understand some of the nuances or the history or why it's important.
Right.
And we're all on some level guilty of that. Right.
For sure. Yeah. I'm not going to say
and that's why I'm not like, I think if anything, the discourse needs less of a purity culture of like, well, if you're truly progressive, you need to believe this and this and this, and you need to pass this quiz that I'm going to give you. So we need less of that. We need to bring people in, but also encourage people like, hey, go beyond just the hashtag and you know, there's so many resources out there to learn about the city. But I would say that the progressivism is, while there is a performative aspect, I think there's a corporate aspect to it, right? Like I think that corporations in Vancouver really want to jump on that wagon too, because they see it as currency or certainly as a brand value. And sometimes that can also blur the lines of like, well, are we actually accomplishing anything?
Right.
Right. Are we making truly inclusive spaces? Are we actually elevating diverse voices? And I'm sure there's mixed results depending on the organization or the industry that you're talking about.
Right. What's one thing you would change about Vancouver? What's one thing that bothers you about Vancouver, or kind of, you're sick of seeing or hearing about, or kind of you wish we could strive to be like another place, or whether it be politically, socially,
yeah. I mean,
culturally.
there's a lot of ways you can take that. Again, like, this is a very desirable place to live. And so while a lot of my commentary criticizes things that affect BC or Vancouver specifically, I do want to acknowledge, like, I'm very privileged to live here. I have an amazing life here. A lot of people do. But at the same time, we are forgetting a lot of people. And I think if we're talking about the number one thing I'd want to change about Vancouver, is that I think we need to make it truly livable for everyone. We need people to work at Starbucks just as we need people to work at schools, to be firefighters, to work in the hospitality industry. And when the market price of rent in the city of Vancouver proper is $3,100 a month for a single bed apartment, like, how can this city possibly be sustainable, right? And so that is the one thing that I just think we've just let it run wild to a point where I don't know what the solutions are, aside from just mass building public housing and supportive housing.
Yeah. If we're going to talk, I mean, we're opening up a can of worms if we're going to talk about the housing market, because that's such a complex issue and goes back quite a far way. But it's, you see a lot of really young people who can't afford to live here moving outside of not only the lower mainland, but moving outside of BC. And that's not good for the local economy either, because now we're losing those people, right? And it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't have to be, we shouldn't be reduced to saying, well, you're just going to have, you don't make enough money, I guess you're going to have to go somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Like, we don't want that either.
No, of course not.
And I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, there's been a surge of people
The flip
moving.
side to that is we also need a ton of professionals here as well. We need more doctors. We need more nurses, right? We need teachers. If you become a teacher in BC, it kind of flipped where before it was very difficult to get the placement in the district that you wanted. Now, from what I've heard from teachers that I know, it's like, yeah, you can pretty much teach wherever. The problem is it going to be worth living in that community based on, how much you're paying? So, if you want to be a teacher in Vancouver, it's going to be worth living in Vancouver, or would you rather go to an outlying area or somewhere else? It's a huge problem. And we've let it spiral out of control to no end. It just keeps getting worse. That's the other problem. It's not like it's stagnant. It's like continues to get worse and worse.
Yeah.
And then we complain like, oh, there's a doctor shortage. And it's like, yeah, no fucking duh. Like, of course, doctors would not want to pay, $4,000 a month in rent when they're probably paying off med school as well. Like, it's just not attractive to bring people here. And I think even industry, it's come to a point where industry is complaining, and you have big tech companies going, it's hard to attract people. It's hard to get people to move here because they see the cost of living. And even like, forget about paying that much. Even finding a place can be very difficult, right? There's so little out there. So this is a big problem. I wonder when or what it's going to take for it to kind of collapse on itself.
Yeah, I mean, it has to come to a collapse. Like, that's what it's going to come down to.
But we've been saying this for like 15 years.
What would it take though? Well, honestly, what's the steps? I don't get it. Is it overrunning Trudeau? Is he the issue? I don't know what it is.
Everyone likes to use him as, for all of his flaws and his policies. It's use him as an excuse. But I remember a few years back when they imposed that 15%, what was it, a 15% tax on if you have a second home, that foreign buyer.
It was a foreign buyer's tax. I don't think it was.
Yeah, whatever came of that, because they announced it and then you never really heard, well, is that actually making an impact? Is that making a dent in foreign investment coming in here and buying up properties? I don't know what's actually happening.
So we have one in BC. That's a foreign buyer's tax. And that definitely did affect the market in some ways. Again, anyone who thought that was going to be a silver bullet was a bit naive, but it did affect the market for a short term. But there's also loopholes around it, right? there's ways to to get around some of those taxes, or even there's ways to get around the property transfer tax, which was happening. And so I'm familiar with kind of BC. I don't actually know what happened on the federal level. I don't cover federal politics that much, so I don't know. I know they were talking about it, but again, even if they did institute it, it's not enough.
I feel like we almost need an economist or a real estate person in here, maybe both, because when I see there's so much, I mean, you can just look all over the Lower Mainland. You can look at the cities surrounding Vancouver, Surrey, Langley, Burnaby, Coquitlam, Portmouth, all those places, and you see, as somebody who spent a lot of time growing up in Port Coquitlam, it looks so much different than when I was a kid. I mean, in the last 30 years, we had no high rises.
Yeah.
Zero. There was nothing. I mean, maybe 3 or 4 stories at the most. Now, Coquitlam looks like Burnaby, looks like Metrotown. Like, you're just skyscrapers everywhere. And then you've got businesses on the ground level. And I see these buildings going up with these advertisements advertising, 1, 2, 3 bedroom suites, and 1 bedroom, 500 square feet, and they want 600,000. I'm like, who's setting these prices? Why is that even allowed? I don't understand.
It's what people will pay, right? Like, often they sell out. But I think, to Coquitlam's credit, they did it right. Like, especially because they were building out that SkyTrain there, you have to build density around rapid transit. And so they were smart to do that. I think Port Moody is way behind. They have that one SkyTrain station.
Fucking Port Moody.
And there's like no density there. There's still like single family homes like across the street. And so when you have when you have a SkyTrain, the whole point is you want to get people out of their car, because most people are working downtown. SkyTrain is built to take you into the city efficiently and out of the city back to where you live efficiently. And so I will say that Coquitlam did it right. In terms of the prices that you're paying, like, I understand that it's wild. But the reality is we also do need to build more supply, because we are bringing in so many immigrants, and we want to bring in so many immigrants because we have labor shortages across industries, particularly vital industries like healthcare. And the question becomes, where do we house folks, right? And so I think, certainly Vancouver, which is largely single-family home, like, we think of Vancouver as downtown, but when you look at Vancouver as a whole, like, the great majority of it, in terms of residential zoning, is single-family homes, and that eventually has to change. And so, good on cities for when they get rapid transit to build those high rises to densify. That makes a lot of sense. Even Lower Lonsdale, right? Like, there's a lot of high rises there.
Yeah, dude, I was gonna say.
But it's perfect because you have the C-bus there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, do you want a ton of towers on Grouse Mountain? I don't know, because there's no like rapid transit. So is there a case for it?
No.
You'll have to widen the roads. People are still going to be driving. So it's a lot of coordinated planning between all 3 levels of government. And I feel like when the federal government is setting, and I'm pro-immigration, obviously, but like when they're setting these high immigration targets, but then not really paying attention to like the housing that is needed in major cities, it's on them. When cities go, well, we're not setting immigration targets, it's not our problem, it's on the municipalities, because they also need to accommodate that growth. And it's also on the province as well, that it's kind of the middleman between both, and also has a role in building housing, and certainly building social housing as well. So it's, I guess the point is, it's super complicated. I don't think any level of government is doing it right, but there are certainly some governments, like the city of Coquitlam, that are probably doing things better than other cities.
North Van's kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I would argue the city of North Van did a good job, certainly with Lower Lonsdale and that area.
Dude, Lower Lonsdale's beautiful now.
Yeah.
Like, Lonsdale Quay is just bougie as hell.
Well, and Shipyards is such a great public space. And for the fact that they have, I mean, certainly in the summer, weekly beer gardens and events, like, there's never any issues down there.
No,
either.
dude, it's so packed now in Lonsdale Quay during the summer. so bad.
awesome.
I love it. I remember the time when, like 10 years ago, when it was barely any people. It was kind of, Lower Lonsdale was kind of known as that, like the greasy kind of, not really. There's a bunch of like skids and stuff there. That McDonald's on Lower Lonsdale, like that's what it was kind of like known.
Now,
for,
are you old enough to remember there was a restaurant in Lower Lonsdale that was a ship, and I think it was called the Seven Seas. And I was reminiscing about this with a friend, but it was a seafood restaurant, but it was like in the shape of a ship, and it was on the water.
No,
and that was like the big attraction aside from the key market.
Okay.
There was like, I think it was called Seven Seas, and I don't know what happened to it. I mean,
I can't recall. I can't.
Because I remember going when I was in elementary school. So again, you were either not even born or you were like a toddler at the time. So it might have been before your time, but
right.
Yeah, no, they made it beautiful. I mean, I think the city of North Van has done well. I feel like the district has kind of dragged its heels a lot, but I'm hearing that they are kind of getting on the program a little bit. And I do think that the province, which has said that they're going to incentivize and penalize municipalities for the amount of housing that they approve, and you even have Pierre Poilievre now saying like he's going to, penalize municipalities that don't approve enough housing. I do think that that's needed, and it does have to be a coordinated effort at the end of the day.
I'm just thinking, where would you even build housing in North Van? It's pretty populated, wouldn't you say? I mean,
again on main roads, so like Mount Seymour Parkway would be a great example. I would maybe around Edgemont. Again, I don't know what I know it's just buses out there, but like you would have to build, if not high rises, you would have to take rows of single family homes and build townhomes.
Right.
They're not going to be cheap, to be clear, right? Like if you let the market do it, it's still not going to be a quote unquote affordable.
Yeah, nothing's going to be cheap.
But it will be slightly more affordable than just a single family home. But again, I think what is truly needed is that build out of social, and for your listeners, like Canada used to do this. The federal government was in the business of building social housing, and they started cutting back in the 80s, and then the Chrétien government under Finance Minister Paul Martin completely ended the program. And when you look at how that correlates with the cost of housing, with the rates of homelessness, like there is a direct correlation. And so the impact of the federal government getting out of social housing has had just irreversible damage on Vancouver, Toronto, and arguably other, metropolitan areas in Canada. So I do think that there has to be a significant return to that system.
Right. Man, that's a lot of things I didn't know.
There you go.
That's something I didn't know, man. And I hate the fact that I didn't know that, and I feel like I should have, and I sound ignorant and dumb, and I don't know. Well, one thing I want to get your opinion on, the cost of living and how expensive. Do you think there's a trickle-down effect to people being more angry, anxious, depressed? Because we're, as a city, also very notorious for not being very nice and kind. We're very polite, but we're not kind, because there's a difference. People think, and I hate people that think Canadians are nice. People in Vancouver, and we're not nice.
No.
Like every American that comes here, or people from other places, oh, Vancouver, I love people here. They're so nice. Man, no, we're not. Stop giving us that ego that we desperately need to pipe down a few notches.
So, and I don't know what it's like now. It's been maybe close to 10 years since I've been back to Toronto properly, but I remember being in Toronto and I thought people were actually kind and like friendly. And I know Toronto gets a weird rap, but like I remember going to like, I was younger, and so you went to the bars and like people would just want to spark up a conversation to the point that for me as a Vancouverite, it was like off-putting, where I'm like, why are you talking to me? You know?
Yeah.
And we always have that attitude in Vancouver. Someone like strikes up a conversation, you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But then you go to other places. I would say even in Canada, like I've recently been to Edmonton, and people are just like, strangers will just say hello. They don't want anything. They're just like, it's just like the culture of like, hey, how's it going? Oh, hi. You see, you make eye contact. You don't just like look away. You just go, hey, what's up? And that's it. And I don't think we necessarily have that. And I feel like when people do that in Vancouver, they're the weirdo, even though that shouldn't be weird. Right? Like if you, there should be nothing weird about saying hello to someone who's a stranger.
Fucking insane to me, man. This place
but
never
it, like,
ceases to surprise me.
It's only until you see it elsewhere that you realize like, oh, we're so weird.
Yes.
And I used to get embarrassed because I feel like my parents used to do that a lot. And again, new immigrants, they're whatever, friendly, they speak English. And so they were like, hey, hello. And so I used to be rarely embarrassed because I never saw anyone else do it.
Right. It's like,
But
Mom,
now-
don't do it. These
Yeah.
people aren't going to answer you. They're going to think you're weird. Like,
But now I'm just like, that's actually a better way to live.
right.
Right? I mean, how many people, and I'm guilty of this too, but it's like, how many people live in a building where you don't know your neighbors?
Right. Yeah.
And it's probably more common than you think. Or a couple, but otherwise you don't even, you're getting in an elevator with someone, you don't really see
Right.
anything. Like it's weird. I don't know why we are that way. I wonder if it's because of the weather is so bleak for like 8 months in the year.
8 months of the year. It could be a bunch of things. There's a bunch of moving parts when it comes to that. And I guess
Because I think this predates the cost of living crisis. Not that Vancouver was ever a cheap city, but like it's certainly off the rails now. But I think you can't just say like, it's a tough city to live in. Like there was something weird about us before things got crazy.
so it's this has been an ongoing thing for years.
I think so. Like the I would call it unfriendliness. Yeah, sure.
Wow, okay. I didn't know
I
that.
think so.
Because as a kid, I wasn't too aware of it, right? I didn't.
And now everyone's just on their fucking phones. So it's like
So like now you don't even get the chance to maybe even
make eye contact. People. Yeah.
maybe improve it in some way.
Well, there's this comedian Ivan Decker who's got a joke about it, and he's like, when you're on the bus, you have two places to look. You can look at the ground, or you can look out the window. But he's like, don't you dare be that guy who tries to spark up random conversation on the bus. Don't you dare be that guy. And it's so weird, right? Like, what is wrong with you're traveling together? Why not just say, hey,
Right.
what's up? What's going on? Like,
Well, like I'm used to this culture now too. So when someone wants to spark up a conversation with me, and I'm like, fuck, like okay,
I get weird.
I guess we're getting into it, right? But
Yeah.
in my head, when I think back on that, I'm like, damn, it's just because I'm conditioned in this Vancouver setting, and and it sucks. It really does, and that leads to
I like doing this thing where anytime I feel uncomfortable or anytime I feel uncomfortable or I have a negative emotion, stepping back and asking myself, am I the asshole? Just to make sure, right? Because sometimes you're like, no, why did I feel weird about that? There was nothing weird about that interaction, or there was nothing weird about what just happened. That's on me, right? It's not on whoever else. And so I think that's I don't know. I kind of live by that of just like, whenever you feel a negative emotion, I think the default setting is to like put it on someone else. But sometimes just like stepping back and being like, maybe it's just about me.
right. I mean, being in this field, do you feel like as the years have gone by, you've naturally become more talkative and more of that guy to spark up a conversation with someone random, or is it?
I'm kind of a split personality that way because I am very social and outgoing, but I again, as kind of only children, I love my alone time. So there's a lot of times where I don't want to talk to anyone or like don't want to do that. But I think as I've gotten older, if someone sparks a conversation, I'm much more open to like entertaining.
Yeah, you're much more equipped to do it because I mean, talking
equipped
is
to do it. But then also, I think as I've just gotten older, just like, and it has nothing to really do with media, but also just, like, sure, I'll have a 2-minute chat with someone. It doesn't hurt. And sometimes you actually walk away from it feeling pretty good, right? Like you get a laugh out of it or whatever, and then carry on with your day.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly more open to that. Am I the guy on the bus trying to make no, I'm still not that guy.
I'm never that guy. Never that. Never that. Yeah. Yeah, man. I don't know. Vancouver, interesting place, gorgeous place to live in. And I'm never gonna take it for granted. Like whenever I go on a trip somewhere and I come back and I look at the city, I'm like, God damn it, this is beautiful. I mean, there's no two ways around it. Like privilege at an all-time high.
I think that's important to recognize, right? Like people, because again, I'm very critical of politicians or certainly people of power, and people often say, "Oh, Mo, you're dumping on the city. You're so negative." And it's like, sure, but also at the same time, I think as someone who is privileged, and I want to remind other people who are of privilege, and we all have varying degrees of privileges and varying degrees of challenges in our life. But I think if you are middle class, certainly if you're comfortably housed in this city, recognize that you live a life that 99.99% of humanity historically would be envious of.
Really? You think so? 99.9%?
Historically, of all humanity? 100%. Yeah, well, not 100%, but 99.99%. Because we have everything. We have, like, there are foods in this city that we can eat year round, which is a very new phenomenon in the scope of human history, right? Like usually foods were quite seasonal. We do have, despite its challenges, we have the best healthcare that ever existed, the best medicine that ever existed. If you get a cut, you're not going to die from an infection, right? We have antibiotics. We have the whole world sitting in our pockets right now in terms of information. Right? Entertainment overload to the point where we have like, what do they call that? Analysis paralysis, or like just a paralysis of choice of like, you'll spend more time trying to figure out what to watch on Netflix than actually watching something on Netflix. Like we're so spoiled in so many different ways. Again, I know that there are certain trends in life expectancy that are changing, but generally speaking, our longevity today is much better than it was 100 years ago, right? Like, I think, again, I'm not dismissing people who are vulnerable, who have challenges in the city. There are many of them, but I'm saying if you are someone who is comfortably housed, if you have a job, you have a family, whatever, like you are living an amazing life right now. And I think even as while I'm very critical of the city and people of power, I do also humble myself knowing that like, wow, there are, again, I genuinely believe 99.99% of humanity, including like historical kings, would look at our life and be like, wow, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because if you were a king, you're still vulnerable to disease. You're still vulnerable to, eating whatever's available. You're still vulnerable to famine and drought and all this other stuff. Access to water, like
no Netflix.
Yeah.
Not being able to watch the 5 seasons or 10 seasons of Friends all in one go.
You press a button on your phone and you get food. You get a prepared meal.
That's pretty insane, yeah.
Right? So that's all I'm saying is like, and I'm not dismissing any challenges that people are facing. There are a lot of people that I think need more services and more support, and we have issues with income inequality. We have issues with equity, absolutely. But again, you're comfortably housed, you have a job, and if you're of relatively good health, you're living like a king, man. You don't think so?
No, I agree with you. I do feel like I live comfortably. I mean, I would say I'm privileged, and
I think, and to add to that, I think that as someone who is privileged, and I'm speaking about all of us, like I do think that we have to have at the bare minimum a consciousness about other people and how they navigate the world. And an example is something like when you and I walk on the street, we don't think about it. But if we're in a wheelchair, curb cuts become very important for how you cross the street. And there are a lot of places in a lot of communities that don't have proper curb cuts or don't have accessibility for people who have disabilities, right? We don't think about that and how we navigate the world, but we should be exercising our privilege to ensure that when these things are built, they include everyone. And so, and again, that's one example, but there's many different things that we can look at when it comes to healthcare and services.
So with that particular example, if someone was to be like pretty gung ho about it and be like, we need to make curb cuts, like this is a big deal, your vote matters. It's like, is that what I can do? For me, like, is that what Mo can do to help make curb cuts? Is my vote? Like, what is it that I can really do? Like, we can be conscious of it, like you said, like, having that little bit of consciousness of, this is how some people navigate the world.
Totally.
But
no one's expecting you to go cut curbs.
But I think a lot of people, I think that's the thing though. I think a lot of people try to enforce that on you. Like you need to be thinking about this. If you're not, you're a bad person. Okay, I'll think about it. Okay, but what do you want me to do now? I can't really fix anything.
No. Yeah. And that's where it becomes, I don't like this idea of shaming regular people because of either ignorance or they're too busy in their lives to know about this stuff. I don't think that that's productive. I think the best we can do is talk about it. We could spread the message. And then when we do have elections, and curb cuts would be something that is largely municipal, ask those questions, try to get involved, try to see who's actually having that in their platform. And I think we would be shocked, especially on that issue, like how many curbs are not cut, especially certainly in the city of Vancouver. Listen to advocates. There are a lot, like I do not want to speak as a disability advocate by any means. There's so many great advocates out there. Gabrielle Peters is one. Even my friend Tamara Taggart is one. Listen to what these folks are saying, right? Because they are largely, especially the people that are vocal and that do, speak to media and stuff. They do end up being the voice for a lot of people in our communities. So that's one example. I think when we think about, you think about drug deaths and drug users and what they need to stay safe and to access services, let's listen to those voices. And so all I'm saying is, like, as a person of privilege, you're not expected to solve everything, but I think that there is a responsibility that you have to try to be aware and try to be a part of improving your community for everyone.
Right. Fair. Yeah. Has there been little examples that have been changed based on, like, what are like, can you think of a few examples maybe of, things that people were moving and someone was, pushing the needle with this and it actually did get changed? Because for me, I'm just such a pessimist and cynical about.
You think about like Insight in Vancouver, and it had it's just celebrated its 20th anniversary. 30th anniversary? It's celebrated an anniversary, so I feel silly for not knowing that offhand. But, a safe injection site in it is 20th anniversary. A safe injection site in the city of Vancouver, right? Very controversial. People thought it would enable drug use. But actually what it did was created better health outcomes because people were using clean needles for drugs that they were going to consume anyways. So there are absolutely examples of people being able to move the needle and speak to affected communities to get the changes that they want. On the other hand, I sympathize with folks who are just busy with their own lives. Like, there are many folks who are, quote unquote middle class, who are just paycheck to paycheck trying to make ends meet. And so that's why I'm also saying, like, I don't want to guilt anyone or shame anyone. But at the same time, you can also encourage people or try to get people more involved in their communities and often recognize that some of your goals are aligned, right? Like the goal of supportive housing or social housing, you and I might go, we're comfortably housed. Why would we care about this? But it's like, we want to be living in thriving communities with people who live, work, and play in those communities.
Because it affects us.
And so it affects us, right?
But for the most part, people think in a way, if it doesn't affect me, I don't care.
Yeah. And but and I think when they do that, they think of what affects them in a very narrow way, right?
In the moment, immediately.
Yeah. Like what's going into my pocket, how does this benefit me specifically, as opposed to like, It's even like
And I'm guilty of that, man.
no, we're
that's the
all
thing.
guilty of it. Like, and again, I'm not sitting here on some high horse thing like I'm doing the Lord's work by any means. We're all guilty of it. It's always a process. But I think even, again, it starts with a conscientiousness and then it moves on to conversations, it moves on to actions, it moves on to, trying to move people who are in power to make those decisions. Even something like homelessness, right? It's easy to dismiss people who are on the street or on a, like you look at someone who's on a tent or in a tent encampment. And I understand people who live in those neighborhoods and go, oh man, it's a blight on our street and it's terrible and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know how you resolve it? You get those people homes, right? Or you get those people supportive housing, or you get them the health services that they need, right? Moving them somewhere else isn't going to fix the problem. It just displaces it. So, I all I'm saying is like, the city has issues. There are many privileged people in the city, self included. We should recognize that, but then on top of that, try to be conscientious of making the city better for everyone.
Right. I just remembered an example of something that happened a few years ago. I was driving with my friend, and this is like the best way to explain how people think in Vancouver. We were at a red light, and there was a homeless person with a sign, and it was. She was waiting for, the light to turn red and for her to come up to the cars and stuff. And I remember the person I was with, I was driving, he was just like, nope, not today. I pay taxes. That's what he said. And that just really stuck with me, right? And I think, that's a pretty common narrative amongst most people in Vancouver. And, he's...
Yeah, and I hate that attitude, but at the same time, I've also... not giving money to someone who's had that sign out. Right? Let's be honest, right? I think,
that threw me off when he said that.
Yeah, but I think there's two sides to this coin, right? The first side is that it's like you can't just dismiss it as not your problem because you pay taxes. Someone else will figure it out. Like, I don't like...
Because that doesn't actually make sense.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that you have to, anytime you see someone with a sign, you have to give them money. I'm not saying that either. I'm just saying, like, just that the carelessness of kind of that attitude, I don't appreciate. At the same time, and the homelessness crisis isn't maybe the best example for this, but I think the climate crisis is actually a better example, where we've downloaded the responsibility of structural communal issues to the individual. You have to use less energy. You have to take the bus, even if it's way more inconvenient than for you to drive, right? Like, you have to, it's your responsibility. And sure, there's an element of that, but it's like, if I work in Vancouver and I got moved, and the closest place I could afford is out in, trying to think of a neighborhood that's underserved by transit, let's say Maple Ridge. And now you're saying, like, oh, you're also going to penalize me at the gas tank, at the gas pump.
Yeah, fuck
right?
off. Get
right?
out
It's like,
of here.
I already got shifted out here. I would love to live in Vancouver, I just can't afford it. But now I live in Maple Ridge. It's like, so why is that still my responsibility? Like, it should be, whether it's climate or housing or whatever, there is a sense of, like, these are structural problems that need structural solutions, not relying on each individual to, quote unquote, do their part. Right? And we saw this with COVID. And I hate talking about COVID because it's just, people are tired of it. But on one hand, we did say, hey, everyone, it's up to you. We're all in this together. Everyone do your part. And people did. But on the other hand, they also made regulations about how you could intermingle because they wanted to stop the spread of the virus. And so when it came to a structural problem, they did have structural solutions, which I'm sure, are controversial on both sides. Some people didn't think it was enough, and some people thought it was overreach. But my point being is, like, they saw it as a structural problem and they gave you structural solutions. Was there an element of personal responsibility involved? Absolutely, and that's fine. But, like, we just cannot rely on every atomized individual to solve the big problems of our time.
And more specifically with climate change, it's a lot like that.
I find with climate change that you get that attitude a lot, right? And you get that attitude of like shaming people because they drive, when really they might have no other option.
Or I just don't want to. I don't want to take the bus. Like, you know, like
the thing is, if something is incentivized, and like the way you get people to change behavior, and I drive too, right? So I'm not, again, not shaming anyone or not on my high horse, but the reality is when you make something convenient and just a better option, people will take that. So a great example is Lower Lonsdale, right? If you live in Lower Lonsdale, and let's say you even have a car, but you need to go downtown, you're going to take the C-Bus. It's so much easier.
Yeah.
It's faster and it's easier. You're not going to drive. You're not going to pick which bridge to take and, you know, spend 30 minutes or 40 minutes to get to the other side. You're just going to take that quick 15-minute C-Bus ride. And there's some low-hanging fruit there in terms of like how we can update infrastructure to incentivize people to get out of their cars. And then there's other areas that, yeah, it's going to be a challenge to figure out the business case behind it. But the point is like, are we doing enough? Probably not. Certainly not on the climate file.
And I'm here sitting and saying that it's never going to change. It's never going to get better. So I just do what I want.
I get it. I get the defeatism. Like it does feel sometimes
right?
like I like to put it as like we're microdosing the apocalypse. Right? Like it just feels like things are getting worse and worse. And what is the breaking point and what will that entail? And so I get the cynicism. Like I'm probably very cynical myself, but at the same time, like, are we just going to go down like that? Are we just going to?
Right. I mean, I would never do this, but you know, me throwing out a piece of, you know, a protein bar wrap outside my window when I'm driving, you know, how much is that really going to affect anything? I would never do that because that's just slimy, and I am for climate change and looking out for the environment, but
in that case, I think you should be shamed.
I would never do that.
I think they should shame you if you do that.
Right, yeah.
Right? Because again, people think like, oh, it's either you want the government to do everything or it's all personal responsibility. And I'm like, there's a mix of both. But you certainly, like, again, structural problems need structural solutions. You can't police everyone's individual behavior or rely on it. But at the same time, like, that's why you learn not to litter when you're a kid, right? Like, that's why it's a structural solution in a sense, because it's being ingrained in you, like, this is a bad behavior and, like, this isn't good. If everyone did this, we would live in a dump. And so don't do this. And so as a kid, you learn, like, do not litter.
Right.
And that's why.
Yeah.
Right?
And yeah, I don't know.
Have you ever been to Japan?
Never. I really want to go, though.
Japan is wild. So Tokyo, huge city, so clean, no garbage cans on the streets and no garbage. So people have just, again, kind of have been ingrained in this culture. Like, if you have garbage, you just keep it with you until you get to a place where you can throw it out. And where you can throw it out is if you're out in public, you go to a 7-Eleven and they'll have a garbage can, you just throw it there. Or you just wait till you get home and you throw it at home. But like, people have really stuck to that culture. And clearly it's like ingrained in the, like, their identity of being a citizen in Tokyo or Japan or whatever. Even with cigarette butts, people will like, there were a lot of smokers there. And I was like, where do they put out their butts if there's no garbage can or no facilities? Well, they carry a little thing on their belt.
Oh, wow.
And then they like put it out there and then they'll just carry it until they go home or
Well,
whatever.
also you forgot that there's snipers sitting around. If they see someone drop something, headshot.
I think that might be like
might need to come down.
one of those Rockstar games, like GTA 7 Tokyo Drift or something. But no, I don't.
You just get your head blown off if you drop a.
That would be like the.
I would absolutely never throw anything out ever again. I mean, I would never risk it.
So that would be, in some sense, like the authoritarian way to enforce that, right? And I'm not saying snipers, but like, and I don't know what it is like now, but in Singapore, you would get caned for, spitting your gum on the street.
Jesus.
Right? Like there was that case, or I think it was a guy that did graffiti. It was like an American. He did some graffiti. This was back in the 90s, and then he got caned for it. And it was a big international incident. So they had like authoritarian enforcement of these very basic rules. And so that's one way to do it. But I don't think they do that in Japan. I think it's just like, again, it's ingrained.
Yeah, I was joking.
I know. But what I'm acknowledging is that you are correct in that there are some places that enforce certain rules through authoritarianism, right? I mean,
maybe that's what we need in Vancouver. Who knows?
I'm not advocating for that.
I'm not advocating for it, but maybe,
it's like Dubai, right? Like Dubai is an amazing city, clean, safe, just an incredible thing that they've done there. But then the other side of it is like, yeah, it's not democratic. There's no like rule of law. It's an authoritarian state. It's a dictatorship, right? And so for some people might go, yeah, this is great. But then there's a trade-off. So all I'm saying is like, when we think about this type of cultural compliance, sometimes you have it in a soft way like Japan, and sometimes you have it in an authoritarian way like Singapore or wherever else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you just kind of have to.
So you tell me, you're a younger millennial still, right?
Yes, I am technically.
So what, like when you think about the city or the province, like tell me about your challenges. What is your, or even of your circle? Like what are you guys complaining about? What's the...
To be completely honest with you, man, I'm not going to sit here and lie to any of my listeners or anything. I grew up privileged.
Sure.
But it wasn't always like that. So when my mom and we immigrated to Canada with my auntie and my uncle, we actually lived in one apartment. So we came from humble beginnings, but I saw my mom grind away to become a family doctor and gain her GP here.
Cool.
And she became a doctor when I think I was in around grade 7 or 8. So when I was 13 or 14, she became a doctor and we started living fairly comfortably. And ever since then, I've had no sense of feeling that I've been underprivileged in any way. I think I'm overly privileged in the things I want and the things I get, and how I can just navigate throughout my day-to-day life without having any worries financially, honestly. And
we're the byproducts of like the dream. Like you know that, right? Like, and it's the same thing for me. It's like, my parents started a business and we started with very humble beginnings, living in a basement suite, and since then lived a very privileged life. So it's like that dream, we're like the byproducts of it. We're living it. Like our parents did it and we're living it. But I'm curious, like setting that aside, like tell me about the anxieties, because I don't know, like certainly in my circles, it's just like, home ownership becomes a big thing. Like I hear people, saying, oh, I'm, however old, I can't afford a house, whatever. I thought I'd be there by now. Having kids becomes a thing, like how expensive that would be and what you're sacrificing. So I'm just curious, for you being on the younger end of our generation, shared generation, where your anxiety, not necessarily personal to you,
right,
but sort of what you're seeing in your own.
For sure, housing, being able to afford things. I would say my social circle, I'm one of the more privileged ones. So.
But you had a bend of like, because you kind of alluded to it a little bit. I don't know where you lean politically or what you think, but like you were kind of like leaning towards like blaming Trudeau for stuff. So I'm just curious, like, is that coming from?
I don't really blame him because I don't really know what he's doing.
Okay.
And I think the reason why
I'm not defending the guy.
I'm
curious.
But the reason why I'm so, I think, oblivious to the things going on politically is because I've never had the need or the struggle in my life to be wondering what the fuck is going on.
Sure.
Right? Like, because I've been in this bubble for most of my life where everything is pretty privileged. I think that I've wanted anything I've ever wanted. My mom's been able to provide that. She's been a great mother to me. She's worked really hard. And not to say that I haven't gone through any struggles. I have. At the start, like I said, we were living in an apartment suite with one room and 5 people in there. But my mom, I guess it all comes down how my mom has protected me and screened me from the struggles. And she's done her she's made the most effort, and she's made the most effort to make my life as comfortable as possible. And I think in a way that's been a detriment to me. And I've talked to this about my mom. I think she's babied me a little bit and kind of closed me off to the real things that are going on for people that are dealing with things that are financially.
Have you had friends move away? Because I like, again, I'm very privileged, whatever, we've established this, but like I've seen a lot of my social circle, and when I say a lot, I mean like just I've known so many people throughout the last 10 years that have moved. They just said they were done. They don't like it. They want a patch of grass. They want somewhere where they can comfortably raise a family, and they bounced. And that's where I think, again, not that it was me personally going through that struggle, but it's like when you know people that are going through it and they just make that decision, and it's hard because they're literally uprooting all that they know and then moving somewhere else. That's where you start to go, oh yeah, this is kind of fucked up, because these are people that are professionals. They earn a good living on paper, but it's just it's not matching with what their goals are.
Right. I think no one that I know has actually gone up and moved away. I think most of the people that I know and the peers that I'm connected with have maybe even lowered their, I want to say lowered their standard, but they're content with making a decent living and being able to maintain.
Yeah. I wonder, and again, I don't know the specifics of these folks that you're talking about. We don't have to get into that, but like, I do wonder if that will change at a certain age, where you get to a certain age and you're like, I thought, I want all these things, and maintaining is not sufficient enough, right? I mean, no, I'm not saying my friends aren't ambitious or my social group doesn't want more and they're okay with just being whatever and just being able to maintain for the rest of their lives. I'm not saying that at all. But for example, like a perfect example I always tell people is me starting this podcast. I wouldn't be able to start this podcast if I wasn't in a place of privilege. Totally. Same with me. Same
right?
With
like
journey, yeah.
Like me, how much do I pay him a lot to do this, to edit everything. I pay a lot for the Instagram ads.
Yeah.
Right? And people that always, a few people have asked me about it. Oh, what did you do to start a podcast? I really want to start one. Well, the first thing I always tell people is, dude, you got to be financially like able to you got to have resources.
Yeah.
Right? And I wouldn't be able to do this if I wasn't privileged. And I'm aware of that. Right? And recently I just moved out. I live on my own now.
Okay.
In one of the new buildings near Main Street.
Right.
That's a privilege, man.
Totally.
That's a really big privilege that I know a lot of people wouldn't be able to afford.
But the reality too, like when it comes to,
you can tell I'm an asshole. You can tell me if I'm an asshole, man. You can tell me if I'm blind.
We
to a
all
lot of
have
things.
the capacity to be an asshole, and it's better. I mean, short of anything criminal, like it's better to not be judged at our worst moments. I'm kind of adopting that philosophy as well, even as I'm hypercritical of people in power. But what I was going to say is, just shifting a little bit, but it's interesting. Like you're right, and I was also very privileged in starting my podcast. It was out of pocket expense, and then even more than that expense, it's the time that you put in. Right, you could be using this time to rest, to go make money somewhere else, whatever, right? Like that's part of it. But at the same time, while we went those routes to take on serious out-of-pocket expenses to start, the accessibility to put out a podcast, it's a very low barrier. right? Like
What do you mean by that? Accessibility.
What I mean by that is like you could buy a mic and have a basic computer and put out podcast, not you specifically, but anyone could put out podcasts just of you talking or commenting on the news or whatever from your home, right? And you were putting that out and you were broadcasting that to the world. Now, 0 people could listen, and that's possible. But also it has the potential that a lot of people could listen and you can catch on and getting into the right channels, whether it is Twitter or TikTok or whatever else, you can reach a lot of people, which again, you couldn't do even 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But now we all kind of have that, not all of us, but a lot of us have that opportunity. And some of us who are more privileged go the extra step of like trying to get professional production and all that stuff. And that's great. But I'm saying like, even for people who perhaps want to start this, it doesn't take a lot. The quality might not be there, but then again, if you build up a certain following, and that's the amazing thing about TikTok, right? Like I see these people, sometimes just doing silly dances, but also just doing commentary. And all they're doing is like talking to their phone. And then you look at the...
It doesn't take much. That's the thing, yeah.
And then you look... I mean, you don't even have to look at their followers. Sometimes you look at these videos and you're like, 1 million people saw that video.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's unreal. You couldn't do that not very long ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so...
And usually they take the video not knowing that it was going to go viral anyways. Just
Yeah.
a stupid little selfie video on their shitty phone. And
Yeah.
it happened to just explode. And from there, it's just like a snowball effect.
And especially TikTok, because I feel like TikTok is built to go, like you're built to go viral if something is really good. But like no one gives a shit about production quality on that, The podcast is slightly different because if it sounds like garbage, people will turn it off.
That's what you always say.
No, 100%. But
And I'm very privileged knowing that this production is top notch. And I know a lot of people don't have that luxury of being able to pay Alex to use his studio and use these mics. They have to use a little Yeti. Like totally. I know that, right? And I sympathize with those people. But I mean, I have the ability to do this and pay Alex. Why should I be held accountable? Why should I be held like as this like ignorant person, like a bad person for doing that? You know what I mean?
Saying that you're bad for doing that.
No one has, but I feel like
you're doing that to yourself.
But I feel like
you're taking on guilt that shouldn't exist.
But I feel like people that know me or know of me and know where I come from and what I have behind the curtains, I feel like there is that commentary of like, oh well, Mo can afford to do this.
You got to get over that shit. I faced a lot of that too. Like, and I still face it. I will have a commentary out there. People are like, well, you're privileged. And it's like, yeah, I've never denied that. And so what? I also work hard at what I...
Yeah, you also work hard. You also worked for what you have.
Yeah, and no, I had advantages, but certainly in the media space, like, it's all me. I've worked very hard to do what I do, and I've always focused on constant improvement. I think it's easy to be self-critical whenever you start any creative endeavor, right? Like, I don't know about you, but the early days of the podcast, and even sometimes now, I'm like writing or trying to figure out some ideas. And I'm like, what am I doing? Who wants to hear my voice? Who wants to hear this? Or who wants to hear me interview this person? Like it's very easy to get self-critical and get in your own head about that stuff. But people don't, I don't think most people think about that in those terms.
And most people don't really care at the end of the day.
Most people don't care. And the reality is if the content is good, they're interested in the content, not anything else.
It's just when they become envious of what you're doing and gaining that traction, then it becomes like a jealousy.
That's a reality with everything. It's not just podcasting, but I feel like there's a lot of people out there that get resentful or, and again, it could be anything. It could be fitness. It could be stand-up comedy, whatever. Like when you start doing creative stuff, you're going to have people that kind of shit on it. And ultimately, they're shitting on it not because it's a reflection of you or your quality or work. It is a reflection on them and them not having, the guts to put themselves out there. Because it is a vulnerable place, whether 10 people listen or 10,000 people listen. It's vulnerable to have your voice and your image out there. And when you record as many hours as you have or as I have, there are going to be things that you say that are stupid,
And I would say even like a lot of privileged people that want to start a podcast don't start a podcast because they're not courageous enough and they're worried about what other people think. So, I mean, just taking the step to do it, even after having the ability and the resources to be able to do it, is another step that a lot of people don't take, right?
It's so funny how much that holds people back. It's like I was talking to a friend and they got into, over the last 2 years, they got into fitness. And she was saying like, oh, the biggest hurdle was I was just scared to go to the gym. And like, I didn't want to be a nuisance trying to figure out what I was doing. And so she did initially hire like a trainer that helped her and get that confidence. But it's just wild that like, you're trying to do something for you, something that you are seemingly passionate or at least interested about. And then like the number one hurdle is like, what are people going to think about me?
Yeah.
And the reality is that the people that love you will support you. They will not, they're not going to shit on you. They're not going to like say that's a dumb idea.
Right.
Now fair enough. If you're doing a dumb idea, hopefully they will tell you. But like when it comes to stuff like that, you would hope that they're supportive. And if they're not, then cut out your life. Yeah.
In some cases, though, some people that maybe start a podcast that have no place to start a podcast and they're terrible hosts, I would venture to say, hey man, like you might.
I just don't want to.
Even those people, would you say, just
do your thing.
Do your thing. I mean,
as long as you're not hurting anyone, yeah, do your thing, man. Like, and failing is something that, for whatever reason, we're so scared of. But ultimately, like sometimes when you fail at something, it can lead to something better, or you just learn different lessons from it. I'll get to my ultimate goal later, but like, let me ask you, what do you want out of this process? Like, do you have a goal in mind, or are you just thinking episode to episode? What is your
10 million subscribers? No, that's one of my goals, 10 million subscribers. And I used to feel a little bit anxious saying that. Like I literally felt my heart beat a little faster when I used to say that, but now I just say it full throttle. And a lot of people are going to be listening to this be like, oh, okay, well, that's never going to happen. But I will say it proudly, I want 10 million subscribers at one point.
I like that. Yeah.
I have a few, goals of the guests that I want to bring on and people that I envy and look up to, and I want them to be on the show at one point.
Totally.
But like the root of this whole show was for me to talk, and I like talking. I like dialogue. I remember in high school, I never told this to anyone, but I remember watching interviews just late night, going on YouTube and watching mostly athlete, like Kobe, LeBron, Dwayne Wade, all those guys. And then it moved on from athletes to celebrities and then to different street interviews. And I always liked that dynamic of like an interview and like one person asking the questions and, getting insight and really digging deep. And that was always really fascinating to me. And I liked talking, and before I knew what a podcast was, I would be talking to my friends and thinking, damn, like I wish we recorded this. I remember thinking like, damn, I wish we could record this and listen to this years from now and just laugh at it, right? Sure. And then I realized, oh, that's fucking called podcasting.
Yeah.
Right? So like my passion is always, like growing up, my passion was basketball and being a basketball player, and I played college basketball, so it was that was a big part of my life. And I don't think anything is ever gonna take basketball's place to how psychotic I was in it and how dialed in I was, but I've learned to love this craft of hosting and podcasting, and a big part of one of my biggest goals with the podcast is to provide a mental health aspect of it, and being able to talk about that, and especially for men, and just get that point across and talk about it, just explore with it, right? So I mean, that's my goal, and I just love creating, man. I just love being in the studio and being able to create and just improve as well. Like, for me to like look back on my previous episodes and things like that and see how much I've improved, it's satisfying. You know?
I feel the same way. It only intensifies, right? Like, I compare my 2020 self to 2018. I'm like, oh man, well, look at all that improvement. And then I'll compare myself today to like 2020, and I'm like, oh man, that 2020 stuff was garbage. It wasn't garbage, but it was like, I can feel it.
Can I ask you about that? Do you still listen to yourself and you're like, damn, I suck? Like, I still listen to myself till this day, like last episode, and I'm like, God, like, what am I saying? Why do I sound like that?
Yeah.
Should I get over that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. Especially in long form, right? Long form, you're just so much more prone and vulnerable to that. And I think that's kind of the beauty of long form, is that it ends up being a bit of a roller coaster, right? You can like really get into it and you're like on all cylinders, and then you'll kind of get into a little bit of a lull where whatever, and then you pick it up again. And so, no, I would get over that for sure. I would absolutely think about ways you can improve, like always be geared towards constant improvement. Again, I don't know if this was recorded or not, but like, I still hate the sound of my own voice sometimes, and so that but I don't change it because that's my voice, right? Like, I'm not trying to be someone else. My recommendation for you, if I may,
absolutely, I was going to ask you for some tips or something.
This is just coming from me admiring the fact that you're much younger when you started this than I was. Is I love the goal. Start breaking it down into bite size. Like, so to get 10 million subscribers, what do you need first? Well, you probably need 5 million. Well, from 5 million, you need 1 million. And then, like, so you break it down, and let's say, I don't know what your threshold is right now, but let's say it's 10,000, right? Like, let's say that's your intermediary goal. Then figure out what's the strategy to get to 10,000, right? And then you start trial and error on getting to that first goal. Because the reality is, like, any monumental goal, like to climb a mountain, it looks impossible. But then when you break it down into like, let me just take the first 10 steps. Okay, I got the first 10 steps. We'll just do another 100 steps, right? And you start breaking it down in bite-sized pieces. Suddenly it becomes more manageable. And like we overestimate what can be accomplished in a year, but we underestimate what can be accomplished in 10 years. So if you stay consistent with something, and as an athlete, I'm sure you understand this better than anyone, is like, if you stay consistent at something for years, the progression you will see is amazing. But if you only judge your progression on 3 months, it's going to be pretty minimal, right? Yeah. So that would just be my only advice. I love the goal. I do it like, my goal setting is more process orientated.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think about metrics that way. They're obviously very important, especially when you're on TV. But I think about my metrics as to like, am I getting feedback from strangers, emailing, tweeting, whatever, saying, holy shit, this changed my mind about something, or wow, that was a great interview. I've never seen that type of conversation. Right. So I'm looking for,
I do value those things, by the way. I'm not like just completely analytical.
No, totally.
Numbers.
That's fine. Yeah. I just, yeah. And I'm not speaking about you. I'm just saying, like, I know my own mind. It's very easy to get obsessed with those numbers. And then you wonder, like, what does that even mean? Like, 10 million obviously means something, but it's like, is it fulfilling, right? And so for me, it's always the process, constant improvement, and then like getting not a cheap reaction out of people, but trying to get a meaningful reaction out of people.
Yeah.
And that is a very tough metric, because sometimes you'll put out good work, or what you think is good work, and like, yeah, you see the metrics of people that listen, but you don't get a ton of feedback. And then sometimes you'll put out something that maybe you think is a bit mid, but for whatever reason, it clicked with so many people, right? And so it's just learning that. And that I like to just focus, even on fitness, right? Like, and I gained 50 pounds over COVID, which I'm trying to shed off now. But pre-COVID, my fitness, and even today now, like this year, probably starting in April or May, just recommitted to, listen, I got to do something physical every day. I don't give a shit about the scale or measurements or anything like that. Obviously, I want to look good in clothes, and I want to look good in terms of my physique. But the goal is always, can I look at the end of the week and say, yeah, every day I did something different. I sweated it out for an hour in the morning, right? And I've just found that because then you feel a sense of accomplishment, right? As opposed to looking at the scale and being like, oh, I didn't drop any weight this week.
I'm not 50 pounds down.
Yeah.
Dude, I gotta ask you. This is a question for me because I need some tips on this. I don't know if you can.
I hope I can help.
How do you stay more present in an interview? Just being yourself, being whatever you want, whatever you want to say. Because is there?
This is a good question.
I'm trying to figure out if that's like almost impossible to do, because once the cameras do come on and once I do become that host and I put the host hat on, I can't. There's no possible way I can be myself because I do need to.
This isn't yourself? You seem pretty present. Am I
pretty present, you think?
I think
Am I being pretty present?
Yeah, nothing feels forced or like you're trying to impose
that's my
a line of
biggest fear, man. That is my biggest fear. I don't ever want to come off as phony. And the worst type of thing, the worst insult I've ever gotten was my friend saying, dude, you don't seem like you're being yourself on camera. And I got so pissed off about that. I'm like, It really threw me off.
Right? Like, because like when I do commentaries where it's just me talking to the camera and they're usually 2 minutes or so, those are all scripted. And I'll get comments like, this was scripted. And it's like, yeah, I know. I wrote it.
It's the whole point.
That's I can't do an impromptu rant in 2 minutes that's gonna hit the way I want unless it's scripted. Like no one can. I'm sorry. Like it's just not possible. But when it comes to interviewing, I actually had this issue as well. And this is kind of in the weeds. I don't know how many people will enjoy this, but I would go, because in long form, I would go in with a strategy. Even when I started doing the TV segments for CHEK, would go in with a strategy of what I want to get out of it. And I was sticking to this mental, I don't even call it a script, but a mental strategy of where I wanted the interview to go. And I had a news director at CHEK who's no longer there, but he was like, listen, he's like, you're captivating on your own when you talk to someone. Like, just let it go. Like, just let it loose. And it's hard, right? Because the biggest fear is like, what if I blank and I have nothing to say and I'm not mentally prepared for where we're going next? But what I learned was, and you're probably the same way, is like you do enough prep that like it's not going to be that way. And your personality is already inclined to be talkative, to be engaging.
Think of the next thing to say.
Yeah. And so once you get out of your head, and the way I like to think about it is there's an opening question that I have, and then there's a question that I have to get in there at some point. Everything else, let's go with it. Some guests, and you've obviously experienced this as well, like some guests need a lot of hand-holding, like people that maybe are just not that experienced with media, and so you're really carrying the interview. And then some, you just have to gently nudge them because they're money. They know what they're talking about. They're engaging. They're interesting. And so, you can even step back a little bit. So in terms of getting in, I would just say it becomes a thing of like self-confidence that you're ready, you're prepared for this. Have the opening question that you want, and then have like a go-to or not a go-to, but like a question that you need to ask, right? And then just let it fly and see what happens. And there, it happens with me too, where I'll be doing even a 9-minute segment with someone, and I'm like, I can see on the clock there's like 5 minutes left, and I'm just like, oh man, I don't know what I'm gonna ask next. And then it's turning the volume down on that voice, and then just being like, don't worry about it, just get back into what this person's
talking about. Get back into the flow, right?
Yeah.
I just know that, like for you and me, I'm not going to be as comfortable with you as I am with someone I know for 10 years, like one of my best friends.
Sure.
Right? So that part, is it almost unrealistic for me to think that, Mo coming in here and wanting to sit down to me, that I can get myself to a place where I'm talking to you like you're one of my best friends that knows every struggle that I've had for the past 10 years. Like that's an unrealistic expectation to have.
Yeah, and I would actually say it's a fool's errand to want that, because when you talk to someone that you have a certain intimacy with, like you just know them for however long, it might be inaccessible to a general audience. You know, you guys might have inside jokes that your audience might not understand.
Yes.
Or reference points that they might not understand. And so if you're watching it and you're like, I don't know what these guys are talking about, I'm tuning out. Right. And I would also argue you could get into a conversation. And this is, I think, just the reality of it. It's not about who your friends are. It's just like the conversations I would have with my closest friends, while I think they're amazing and hilarious, I'm sure people are like, "What? Like you guys are idiots, or you guys are boring, or whatever." Right. Like, so I don't think that should ever be the goal.
Okay.
I think there's like, you create the illusion in a sense of like casualness and, comfort and all that stuff. But the actual reality of like two friends chatting, no one cares.
Right.
Unless they're like uber famous or whatever, no one cares. And even then, it can be really boring. I've heard celebrity podcasts where it's that exact same idea, and I'm tuning out because I'm just like, oh, these guys are just half telling stories from their shared experiences,
their history and their experience,
and they're not explaining the stories well enough for me to even follow along.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. That's such a big fear I have, man, because just me being casual right now and talking to you, I am comfortable. I'm not saying I'm not, but the comfortability is like completely different. Like when I had when we did the UFC episode with the commentary, I had a couple of my buddies on, and that little like mental block of carrying myself a certain way as a host completely went away.
That's different though, right? Like you guys are all shared in a commentary that people are also they're also watching the fights at the same time. I imagine it was like a fight companion.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So again, that's slightly different. It could vary, obviously. Like you could start getting into, your personal stuff, but yeah, I just think that's a different. It's not an interview. It's more like just a fun commentary, or like it's like the people who play video games and stream and then comment at the same time. Like that's a different format altogether.
Right.
So
you think I'm just overthinking it, honestly?
Yeah, we're all overthinking it.
Okay. I always leave these episodes, like this episode I'm going to leave with you, I'm going to be like, damn, man, why wasn't I just more present? Just be more Mo. Just. But then I also don't want to weird you out because I'm a pretty weird guy when I am present. So I have to have some sort of barrier. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like in general though, like if let's say we had known each other for years and we'd gone on trips together and stuff, and like we're chatting and I'm like, oh man, like it's like that time in Scottsdale. And you'd be like, oh, it's exactly like that time in Scottsdale. And then the audience is like, what happened in Scottsdale? Right? Like you and I as friends would not necessarily go over every detail for it to make sense to a stranger.
Oh, right. Okay.
So again, like in this realm of interviewing, there is a performative element because you're always, whether you like it or not, you should be keeping an audience in mind. If they can't follow along, then what's the point? Why are you recording it?
Right. Okay. That brings me a little ease of mind.
Did we go over? Am I boring you guys?
No.
Okay.
This has been great, man. This is because just even
when did we start recording? What topic did we start recording?
Oh,
Was
man.
it North
Van? It was North Van. Yeah. We're at an hour 51 right now.
Oh my!
It's been great, man.
No, I think you've been very natural. I think the time flew by for me. So
same with me. Yeah.
So if that's what you're going for, is that casual vibe? Yeah.
And you feeling comfortable. That's my biggest thing, honestly. Like whenever a guest comes in, I just want them to. I never want to be that guy where like, wow, that guy was weird. Like that was a weird host.
Yeah, and I get it. You were great.
You're awesome.
No, I'm trying to think of something critical now. Like you're making me think of Let me know when we're recording. That's my first complaint.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Well,
no, because it does, there's an observer effect, right? And I'm sure when you listen back to it and when I'm realizing that we're actually recording, I turned it up a little bit. Like, I think that's just how my mind works.
Okay, so mine's actually the opposite. When I do that, I almost like psych myself out, where it's like, so today we have Mo Amir on the podcast, local news host, podcast host, and then it just kind of puts me in a weird, like, awkward state.
Yeah, and for me, it's
where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But you're a seasoned experience.
I'm.
If you tell somebody, and we're now live, or
That's true.
Yes.
That's true.
I see it in people.
I've seen it. I've seen it in my guests where we're like, okay, so today we have Enjoy Your 24 episode. We have so and so, and they're like, oh, like they get trembly and stuff like that. So I want to look out for my.
No, that's good. And perhaps that's something to keep in mind for other future guests that are, maybe comedians or because I know you've had a couple on, or in the entertainment sphere. Because I don't think I'm vastly different from when I realized that we're recording to not, but for me, there's always an element of like, okay, we're recording, let's turn it up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, that's just you're a pro. Yeah, well, because now I'm recognizing that there's an audience. It's not just us talking. So that's all. Right. And again, I think as a host, it's important to keep that in mind. I think do the subjects and the conversations that you want to have, like focus on that number one. But then keep in mind that you are trying to engage an audience. And you are engaging, right? Like, I'm not saying that you're not. It's just like, I think you can fall into traps if you get too casual.
I appreciate you coming on, man.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I know it took a little while, but happy to be here. I'm always shocked when someone wants to talk to me, so I appreciate the invite. Okay. And I know what it's like to try to get guests on, so I try to pass it.
It was a long time coming. Yeah. We were talking about it for a while, messaging back and forth.
I know, but I'm glad we could do it, and I hope the listeners...
We did it! This has been great, man. Enjoy Your 24, episode 59 with Mo Amir. Anything you want to plug, your show?
Yeah. If you're in BC or in Vancouver, find This Is Vancolour. It is a TV show on TV if you want to watch it. It's on CHEK Thursday nights at 9. But just find This Is Vancolour wherever you listen to your podcasts, or just search for it on YouTube and you'll find some clips.
Awesome, man. Thank you for coming on. I learned a lot. Very thought-provoking. I'm going to listen to this again.
I'm inspired. I'm inspired that you're doing this at a young age. So thanks for having me on, man.
Oh, man. I appreciate it. The fact that you're saying I'm young, man, I don't know. I've been thinking about it.
When you're 38, 27 is very young. Trust me.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Enjoy Your 24. Like, subscribe, comment, whatever you need to do. Always love the support. Anything you guys want to hear, any suggestions. And big news coming up. Some merch talks in the works, so stay tuned for that. Enjoy Your 24. Peace.